And then you got Jesus talking in John 10:34, where he is referencing Psalm 82 and 89 and 1 Samuel 22 and all these places. And he says, does not your own scripture say ye are gods? And
Mm.
so he entraps them because they're like coming at him because they're like, you say you're the son of God, you know,
Yeah.
you got a demon, you're nuts. And he's like, listen, you guys have been saying all along that
Right.
you guys are gods, right? And so what he's quoting back to them is about these Elohim. And so they're very, very important because we see that in Psalm 82 and Psalm 89 and Genesis 6, when their offspring do what they do, um, there's this falling away that has happened. They have kind of, you can go to the book of Enoch if people are more familiar with that and say that the watchers left their rightful place. That's the same idea. You've also got the watchers that you can say are inserted at the same level as the pantheon slash the Elohim.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mystic Gateway Podcast. I'm here with my good friend Luke Agee. I think I got that right, and it's a real honour to have Luke. We've connected through mutual interests over the internet. You know, I think we've had a similar experience with regards to kind of deconstructing some negative religious beliefs and the kind of the rabbit hole that can take you down. But first of all, before we go any further, Luke, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here. Yeah, it's I'm doing well. Thank you, Craig. Yeah,
Good,
excited to be a part.
excellent. Yeah, it's great to have you on. I remember when I was actually in Wales in Company Burning Hearts last November, and you were on the screen. You gave a talk there, which was brilliant, because you do a lot of things about immortality and life and longevity, and I love all that kind of stuff. But I think we're going to go down a different route today because we're talking before we went live on the camera. Something's up for next year. Something's happening. I'm not putting any, thus saith the Lord's out or anything like
Right.
that. But a lot of people are feeling like something's up, like something's about to happen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting things building. I mean, I did a show with Justin, as you know, talking about disclosure. I've done other shows, one about Sasquatch, and just really just going out there with certain topics. But before we get any further, why don't you tell people who you are, where you are, what you're about, a bit about you?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So as Craig said, I'm Luke Agee. That is maybe the vein most people might recognize me from if they do at all. Is some stuff about immortality, life and longevity. Craig and I actually had a podcast once before with Charnel about immortality. So been in that realm for a little while, several years now. Actually, surprisingly, when I stop and look back, I'm like, oh yeah, it's been more years than I realized.
Right.
But yeah, I wrote a book about it and did a lot of conversations around it. Still a huge proponent of that, without a doubt. But I have other things that I dabble in and have been a part of for a long time as well too. I'm in West Virginia in the United States. I am married and with four children, and I did kind of the full itinerant ministry gambit at one point in time, done some online quote unquote ministry there for a long time. But yeah, you're 100% right. I've depending on who you ask, I've deconstructed or defected, backslid,
Yeah.
depending on who you talk to. But no, I feel like I've just gotten more free, expanded, and really found all the things that a lot of people had cognitive dissonance about, and just said, well, I don't want to talk about that, or that's not real. It's not there. My pastor doesn't talk about it, or that's just crazy, whatever. And so I've never been that guy. I've always been like, I got
Mm,
to go knock on the doors. I got to go dig in the dirt. I got to go get beyond surface level. And so, yeah, I've been a little bit all over the place. And so right now I've been kind of quiet for a couple years as far as a lot of presence online or on the road or any of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, just glad to be here and talk with you. But
mm.
yeah, I've got many years of uh, unlearning and relearning and all that
Right.
kind of stuff.
Indeed, indeed, haven't we all? Yeah, it's been a crazy few years, hasn't it? So
Indeed.
we were talking about the ancient gods, okay, and what that means. But there's a huge how can I word it? Like, I don't want to say a dispute, but there's a controversy over kind of what's called the Elohim. Um,
Mhm.
from your perspective, who do you think the Elohim are? What do you think they are? And what role do they play? Certainly in biblical texts and in modern day. Have you got a perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So their offspring is who's really the most kind of recognized or sort of understood. If you're from a purely biblical standpoint, then you would understand them as the sons of God that are mentioned in Genesis 6, that, mated with the daughters of man. But see, that the phrase for who they actually are, or the Benai Elohim, that's why most translations say sons of God, which actually means the sons of Elohim, the offspring of Elohim, which is now, say all that to now backtrack, they have fathers, parents that are not the singular God that you would think of as like God Almighty, the Trinity, Jesus' Father, any of those things you want to say to describe, but they are actually what would be known as a small g God in the scripture. And so in Genesis 1 and 2, I'm going to get controversial right off the bat. You
Do
have two different creation stories. You have where it says Elohim creates in Genesis 1. Genesis 2, you have where it says a specific Elohim, Yahweh Elohim, forms. So you have two different things that are going on here. So there's a kind of a lot you have to say to kind of get the foundation of it. But basically, when you see that revolt in Genesis 6, that would be the offspring, and that would be where you would see in a lot of literature what would be known as demigods.
Mm,
So, thus, they have parents that are not demigods because the demi part comes in from God mixing with a human, right?
mm,
So, the parents of the Benai Elohim that create all these demigods would be the ones that I would say, from my research, my study, are the ones equated to what would be the Greek pantheon.
mm,
So that would be where you would actually have like Zeus, Poseidon, Kronos, Jupiter, Saturn, all these ones that we have names for all over the place. And people don't think a thing of it,
mm,
but it's because they don't understand that all these things are actually being named after these gods, these Elohim, small g gods that are at a place that's below the Most High, which is El. So the interesting thing about that is that El is why you see all these other named beings and entities that come down later that have El in the name.
mm.
You have Elohim, like we just talked about. You have El Shaddai as one of the names for the Most High. You have Angel, right? So all this has to do with El, and then there's this expansion from El. So the race of Elohim would be these gods of old, these ancient ones of old that are mentioned in Scripture, that are mentioned in lots of other, writings along the way. You have Enoch, of course, Jasher, Jubilee, the book. I mean, so many writings that talk about these gods of old, and so to kind of condense it, the answer is that these Elohim would be the ones that would be the Greek pantheon. So that'd be the simplest way to condense it. They'd be a type of God over the sky, a God over the waters, a God over creation and different planet environments. So God of time, things like that. Yes, there's a higher most high, but then it channels down to where power has been given out.
Mm.
So that would be the Elohim in kind of the simplest condensed form.
Right, yeah, because I remember years ago something that sold it for me was there was a YouTube channel called I think it was called the what was it called now, the Bible People or something like that, and there was these Jewish guys who were basically explaining the Jewish interpretation of the Bible, and all these
Okay.
basically
Yeah.
because so much in kind of like traditional fundamental Christianity was way off from what the
Oh,
writers were explaining, as you just explained very well, and I remember seeing on that they spoke about Elohim and that the word Elohim is like a title, like we would have a mum and a dad. Like there are
yeah.
lots of mums and dads, but it's a title given to a certain role and a function. Like the Elohim would be the same thing. That there are many Elohim. That it's I mean,
Mhm.
im I believe is plural as well, which is why in the Genesis story it says, "Let us make man in our own
Yeah.
image." Right?
100%. 100%. You're exactly right. The literal definition, if you go, what I really used to break a lot of this stuff down previously many years ago was something called Blue Letter Bible, where you can go in and do the interlinear translations and find all the definitions. And so it literally tells you right there that it's actually plural, that it's gods. Some other translations from it are like judges and things like that. But it in no way, shape, or form tries to say that this is of some type of human reality. Plus, it's plural. Plus, it is not a singular God. Plus, you do not ever have, if you want to look at it from the explanation that many people have of it being the Trinity, you never have there ever being any place recorded ever again where they say, let us do something ever again. So this
Mm.
is literally documenting where these multiple gods, and then you have that connected to Psalm 82, where it says El stands amongst the Elohim and judges. So when you actually see this, most translation just says God stands in the midst of God, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
That I don't understand this. But
Mm.
when you go and look at it, you realize that it actually says El stands amongst the Elohim and
Mm.
judges righteously and says unto them, why do you not take care? Why do you oppress? You know, you can go read it. People can go read it for themselves. But in a nutshell, El is scolding the Elohim and bringing, basically kind of a righteous judgment slash punishment upon them. And then you see it again in Psalm 89, the same kind of, it's not as in depth as 82, but there's a little bit of kind of a like divine council meeting again, if you want to.
Hmm.
I took that phrase from Michael Heiser because after I kind of got into this, I found Dr. Michael Heiser.
Yeah. I love that guy. Yeah.
God rest his soul. Yeah, legend,
Hmm.
legend.
Hmm.
And that's, he kind of made me feel really affirmed in these days where I was kind of like reeling a little bit, some of his revelation, like I'm crazy. And it was him who really came along and helped me put a lot of verbiage and confirmation to a lot of things. But
Hmm.
then you also have, I think it's First Samuel 22:22, if I remember correctly, where there's this really weird council meeting that is documented, where it says we need the king to be deceived so that he goes into battle. And it says this deceptive spirit said, "Hey, I'll go down and do it." And so, once again, that's one of those Christianese things where they're like, "Well, we're just going to ignore that because that's psycho. That wouldn't happen. That's not." I mean, I know it's there, but like we're not that. That's not really the Father, right? And they're correct because there's this kind of cabinet meeting that has gone on amongst the Elohim. That's like, how are we going to deceive this dude? And so you can find that there as well too. And then you got Jesus talking in John 10:34, where he is referencing Psalm 82 and 89 and First Samuel 22 and all these places. And he says, does not your own scripture say ye are gods?
Hmm.
And so he entraps them because they're like coming at him because they're like, you say you're the son of God,
Yeah.
who you got a demon, you're nuts. And he's like, listen, you guys have been saying all along that
Right.
you guys are gods, right? And so what he's quoting back to them is about these Elohim. And so they're very, very important because we see that in Psalm 82 and Psalm 89 and Genesis 6, when their offspring do what they do, um, there's this falling away that has happened. They have kind of, you can go to the book of Enoch if people are more familiar with that and say that the watchers left their rightful place. That's the same idea. You've also got the watchers that you can say are inserted at the same level as the pantheon slash the Elohim. And it says that they, left their rightful place and did things they weren't supposed to do. And so then you can go into this judgment that happened. And in this judgment, it literally says that you call yourself gods, and this is the Most High saying, "I made you this way." And he says, "But now in your punishment, you're going to die as men."
Mm,
And so you have where this punishment is now, well, you are going to now encounter this same kind of death that you have brought upon that which you also created. Because going back to that Genesis 1, this is not the Adam and Eve in Genesis 1. This is literally a race called Adama. And so it's just all this mankind. Who knows for how long? I mean, literally, there you can ask theologians, historians, people that research this all the time, and they're all just guessing. They're like, it could have been millions of years, thousands of years. We don't really know.
mm,
We just know that there was races of people that were created. There's probably been destruction, rebirth, destruction, rebirth, numerous times, all this stuff that's gone on. And then in Genesis 2, you have that specific Adam that we all look back to and say, this is Adam and Eve. And so that's why it matters as well, is because before Adam and Eve ever showed up, there was who knows how long of this race of humanity that was created by the Elohim.
mm,
And this is where I think the pride of, if you want to say Lucifer, which is actually wrong anyway, it's actually Hillel. When we talk about people referencing Isaiah 14 and say, Lucifer, that's actually an imposition that was brought in of a transliteration and translation that should not have happened, because it actually is one of the sons of God, one of the morning stars that is in Job 1, where it talks about the morning stars gathering together. And it's actually Hillel, not Lucifer. But anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit trail.
That's
But
an important
um,
distinction, that though. That's very important. Yeah.
it absolutely is. Yeah, people should definitely do a lot more research on that, because you have all these names that are thrown around, and people once again just bundle it together and say Hillel, Lucifer, Satan. Most people don't even know about Hillel, truthfully, but if they do, they just say Hillel, Lucifer, Satan, the devil, Beelzebub, and just kind of say, well, all this is the same,
Mm,
right? And or the old dragon or the viper, the snake, all this, and they just throw it all together. And really, there's some distinction amongst just about all of them. And but anyway, that's a whole other thing.
mm,
But that's what I'm saying. It's like this stuff can start expanding so fast, and
mm,
it's like you feel like you can't miss certain pieces of it because it matters so much to explaining certain things, that all the foreground and background matter a whole lot. But yeah, so they like you were saying about let us do this. Well, I believe all this was a permission thing. I felt along the way after studying it for a while that this was a question
mm,
that they were seeking, because we know that John talks about that in the beginning was the Word. So we know that beyond, before there was this Genesis 1 even, and before they say let there be light even, because we see that Genesis 1 says that all the earth was created, and then it says, but then it became formless and void.
mm,
So before we have anything physical in this kind of dimensional reality created and brought forth, there's this whole other heavenly dimension of reality that's been in existence eternally, and that would be the Word, that would be Christ. That would be
mm,
the Most High, the Supreme, the Source. And so they're asking, I believe, for them to have some of that light, to be able to create, to bring things into reality.
mm,
Reason I say all that, once again, stacking line upon line here, is because I think the main issue that we have that began really everything that matters from the past, present, and future is that they said, let us make a race in our own image.
mm,
And so then that was where they said, we want to be able to make entities that we can look back at, that's reflecting glory back to us and worshiping us, and basically make them into a slave race, basically make them into a race of existence that they can be glorified by.
mm, mm,
And so then the Elohim do this and they begin making. Well, then they have, I don't honestly know, in all my research, nobody really seems to be able to know. There's no real true artifacts, no true documents yet that have really been able to come to pass that have explained why we have Elohim and why we have Benai Elohim, and this is supposed to be their offspring, unless it was just that this is a created race and this is a created race.
mm,
But yet their titling is Elohim and Benai Elohim. But the way it's interpreted would suggest that this was offspring of Elohim brought into existence. But we don't know for sure. So then the Genesis 6, fall comes that we all know about. But previously we have Genesis 3, Before we have Genesis 6 and the fall that comes about there, we have Genesis 3. I purposely believe, or I actually believe, not purposefully, I don't know why I said, I happen to believe. I'm trying to figure out which rabbit holes to choose, so I'm trying to talk while my brain's trying to
It's
figure out all
okay.
the different
Take your time.
paths.
Take
Well,
your
it's like I don't
time.
want to get too long-winded, but I also want to make sure there's not little pieces that are kind of left out. And then if you have
Right.
anything you want to throw in,
Yeah.
but with the fall of Genesis 6, I believe they saw that take place because of Genesis 3. And so, either way, whether it did or didn't start at Genesis 3, we can say it started at Genesis 6. There was this subversion where the Elohim and the Benai Elohim were not a big fan of one of the specific Elohim making their own formed creation. And then they didn't just make them in their image. This particular Elohim said, well, I'm also going to breathe my very life into. And so that's the Adam of Adam and Eve, the Genesis
Mhm.
2. It goes from Elohim did, Elohim did, Elohim said, Elohim said, Elohim, to then all of a sudden Genesis 2, it says Yahweh Elohim, formed from the dust of the earth. So now all of a sudden we have a specific title and name. So we have, oh, well, this is Yahweh and Elohim.
Mm.
Whereas before we have no name, just the council, the gods, the group together said, let us do this. And so this one kind of either rebelled or just independently said, well, I'm going to do this on my own, however you want to look at it, and formed out of the dust of the earth, the one that we now know as Adam, that Eve came forth from, breathed the breath of life into to make this union that was way different than had been done ever before.
Mhm.
So there was this unity, this oneness, this desire of relationship and love that was there by this one individual, Yahweh Elohim, versus how the other Elohim just made these cattle, if you will, that looked like them.
Mm.
And so we have a big distinction that begins right there. So then the subversion story basically becomes that's why in Genesis 3, you see I'll put enmity between your seed and her seed. And you see where this serpent story goes on, and Eve, of course, we all know the story there. That's why I'm not trying to get too muddied up there, but it's
Mhm.
important because there's a seed war that is going on, always has been. And I know I used to talk to people about this before, and people would start quoting to me, well, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, I mean, you, you can go ahead and take that stance if you want, but there's also a ton of history and
Mhm.
just kind of looking around on a day-to-day basis where you can also say, well, this must mean something different than just taking its stock value and saying,
Mhm.
well, this guy's got a gun pointed at my head, so we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Good
But it
point. Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so, yeah, no, I'm not going to try to get on that argument, but the whole seed line distinction comes about because of the bloodline that was brought forth from Yahweh Elohim, a specific Elohim, versus the bloodline of races that were created by the Elohim.
Right.
So, creation, formation, all that matters because of where we're at now. The punishment that came down, you can see in Ezekiel 28. There's a story where very famous story of Ezekiel talking to the prince of Tyre, who is a man, a human. But as he's talking to him, he starts calling forth the true nature of what is within the prince of Tyre. I believe it was actually one of the Elohim clothed in a human body because he starts talking to him and starts saying, you walked amongst the precious stones. You were in these heavenly places. You were one of these beautiful beings until iniquity was found within you. And then you were brought down lowly. And so all of a sudden you're going, well, what in the world is Ezekiel talking about? Until you start to begin to have this understanding that it says that these ones that were known as gods were given a punishment that they would fall to the earth and die as.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that, well, I'll pause there for a minute and see if you have any thoughts or if you want to kind of steer it any or whatever you
Yeah,
want.
I mean, you're doing great. I mean, this is just. I think it certainly. I mean, guaranteed in kind of fundamental Christianity, there's no awareness of this. In my experience, in the kind of like I don't know the disclosure world or the people who are those of us that are waking up or choosing to wake up, it's like there's a lot of mishmash of information. It's like a lot of conflict, which I don't see as a bad thing because I think it's good that we have shared ideas. Now, it doesn't need to cause division, obviously,
Right.
but I see a lot of like discourse over this. I mean, I'm sure you've read the works of Paul Wallace. I mean, I've had Charlotte and I had Paul Wallace on the show, and I think his information is really, really astounding. I mean, this it was him that kind of steered me in this direction. This idea that the separation between the gods of creation, i.e., the Elohim, and the God that Jesus called Father. Is that Yahweh Elohim? Is that what you're saying?
So there is actually a lot of discourse about that right now, and I know that I don't know where he was when you talked with him, but I know a lot of his more recent stuff. You know, he has that book. I think it's called the Escape from Eden. Maybe
Hmm.
I think it's called, where I know that he doesn't take that stance. And I've researched a lot of that, and I have a lot more questions than I did in years past. But
Right.
I still think that I lean towards all the evidence that I have found, especially because of all this with Elohim, that if there's anything, yes. So to answer your question, yes, I think that because of even Jesus's own name, Yah and Jehovah, it's all right there together. You can't have Yod He Vav He and then have Yeshua Yod He Shin Vav He
Hmm.
without having the same name, interlapping. So it's like there's kind of a real hurdle to me, even just right there,
Right.
trying to say that maybe Yahweh's this wicked entity and maybe he was actually the one that had them entrapped in the garden. And I can understand. I can understand why there's a lot of that. But here's what I think happened. I think that there was an abduction or a hijacking, if you will, of the name Yahweh
Mm.
on different occasions. So I think when Yahweh revealed himself for the first time in this name, instantly these other gods, these other Elohim are going to begin to say, well, now I'm appearing in this name.
Mm.
Now I'm showing up this way. And another good example to me, and I'm sorry, I know you probably were expecting a short answer.
No, it's good. Keep going. Keep going.
uh, Another one of those great answers to me that really helps with understanding some of this is not all of it is about Yahweh being bad, but you can also find a lot of there being a mixture of where the Elohim definitely appear good or bad, and Yahweh appears good or bad.
Mm.
And I think it's because there's such a mixing. And here's one of the perfect examples. When I was first getting opened up to all of this, one that really rocked my world was the whole story of Abraham and Isaac.
Mm.
So we all get taught all of our lives, Isaac gets taken up by Abraham and he's supposed to be this little guy that's now going to become the sacrifice. And, it's the same picture of Jesus and the Father. And it's just so twisted, so convoluted. I don't even want
Right.
to get down that way. But then you start to really realize and study the facts on it and the real history on it. And you go, wait a minute, Isaac was a 30-some-year-old man that went up the hill with his father, and Abraham, first of all, looks at the servants and said, I and the boy will return. And I know that this has been turned into a, well, even if he was killed, Abraham knew that the father would raise him back to life. No, this was not about Abraham ever believing that the one who gave him the promise was actually the one having him kill his own child. Because
Mm.
he says right at the base of the mountain, when they leave the servants, he says, we'll both come back. Then you get up there, and when they're talking, he tells Isaac, he said, the Lord is going to provide. Then when they get up there, it says that this angel comes and stops it, right? We know all the story. Well, all of a sudden, when you start to dig deeper, you realize that it says an Elohim told Abraham to go kill Isaac.
Mhm.
Then what angel shows up? An angel of Yahweh shows up and says, no, don't do this thing. So then you have all of a sudden, wait a minute, Elohim was trying to have Isaac killed. But Yahweh Elohim sent an angel, a messenger, or as they like to say, a Christophany, where there was the actual appearance of Yahweh himself in a messenger form that came and said, no, don't do this thing. And just as Abraham said to Isaac, you look over and there's a ram caught in the thicket, and that's what they sacrifice. Now, guess what the word El means at its most debased root form? Ram.
Hmm.
So El, the Most High, El Elyon, in the pantheon, if you will, the hierarchy,
Mhm.
is that's his very name. And so instead, just like with Yeshua, you have where the ram is what becomes the sacrifice after an Elohim tried to have Abraham destroy his own son. And Yahweh shows up and says, no, 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 don't do this thing. And then says, look, here's the sacrifice. And it's the same exact representation of his own name.
Mhm.
So I can understand where then other people read scriptures and it says Yahweh is a God of war, and Yahweh says dash the babies against the rocks into pieces and some other things. So I understand the argument, but my thing is what if this is a subversion or a hijacking of the name
Right.
Yahweh?
Right.
But anyway, so yes, I know about Paul Wallace and I highly respect his research.
Mhm.
I highly respect, 90, well, I respect it all. I just have a disagreement with some of it, even though I respect the work that he does. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. No, that's explained brilliantly because that Abraham and Isaac story was a big one, and Paul Wallace did bring that up as well in one of his books. I can't remember which one. Um, just we shifting gears slightly because we live in the modern world, and you know without getting too deep and too dark, there are things going on in secret on this planet that isn't great. Let's just say that, okay? And that's
Right.
kind of like there's like a huge revealing going on, and I'm not just talking political or political corruption. I'm talking at the deepest, darkest levels.
Yep.
Um, and no question about it, these people have are hell bent on demonizing Christians, Christianity,
Yep.
um, and there's a huge question why. I mean, a lot of people that I respect a lot, people like David Icke, and who've really like given themselves to truth and
Yeah.
bucking against the social kind of manipulations and things like that. Um, they openly talk about like they have a satanic worldview, and or Luciferian. Now there is a difference between Luciferian and satanic. They're two different trains of
Mhm.
thought. The Luciferians believe that the God that we were just talking about is the bad guy, and that
Yep.
Lucifer was the good guy for rebelling against this tyrannical, monstrous God. Um,
Exactly. Yep.
and they've really demonized Christianity because they say it reconnected us back to the monster God. Now, my
Mhm.
opinion is that's a subversion of reality, like you said. There has been some form of, in history somewhere, a subversion of what we believe. And we're going down the rabbit hole here, but the whole the church, the Christian church, I would say the Catholic Church, who I believe started very well. I have a lot of
Yeah.
respect for
Right.
Catholicism and Catholics, but they subverted Christianity as it started into another sacrificial, painful, suffering religion.
Yeah.
Um, And I guess based on what you're just saying, that's kind of reconnecting us to the old gods who demand
Yeah.
sacrifice, right?
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's why, you have Stephen who comes along and he's speaking on behalf of the same God, which, would be the father of Yeshua. And he's saying, sacrifices I never asked of from you.
Mm,
And he says, all I wanted was you to give mercy, and then he says, mercy triumphs over judgment. And there's this whole thing, and Yeshua started it when he showed up, of course. And he says, they say, what's the law? He said, well, there's only two: love the Father and love your neighbor.
mm,
And then of course people turn that into a whole weird thing of submission under fear, submission under worry of falling away or not loving enough. But really, all he was saying was, is when you understand how much you're loved, then you're just going to be loved. You're going to be receive love. You're going to give love. You're going to be love as the one who is love, and you're going to be the exact same nature of right.
mm.
And so he's saying this whole law is something that wasn't even given by my father anyway. It's a whole nother rabbit trail. But I mean,
Right.
Paul comes along and says clearly that this was given by the angels. He says this is something that was given by angels, and it's a letter of death, and it's an agreement with death. Well, why is it? Well, because under the law, like you said, people were still having to kill.
Mm.
And that to me is the biggest thing. Jesus showed up into the temple and people were like, oh, he's upset because of the type of sacrifices that they were using. No, I think he was mad because they were killing everything
Mm.
and
Mm.
they were making money off of murder and death. And so,
Mm.
yeah, it's exactly the same thing. And, that's a cult in its very core
Right.
is the life is in the blood, right?
Mm.
So utilizing blood to current size and turn into an ability to trade and profit and to expand curses or to expand blessings, even if it's evil blood money blessings that come, in the source of sorcery and magic, then yeah, that's always what they've practiced in.
Mm.
And this is the destruction of Sodom. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going on, and I'm not even saying it was the same father of Yeshua that did that, a whole other conversation. But what the destruction of Sodom came about because of the fact that they were doing all this interstellar seed line trading. And
Mhm.
so they were, trading on soul fragmentation. They were trading on future generations. They were trading from in the earth dimension, the heavenly dimension. They were working with other beings that were shapeshifters. We know that because it said the one showed up and they were humans, and the people in that city were so wicked and depraved that they said we want to have sex with these beings,
Mhm.
and the main guy of the story, Lot's like, hey, taking my daughters are like, no, we want these entities, right? So there was a lot of freaky deaky, weird, crazy stuff going on. And so that's always, yeah, been a part of that. That's where you have, like the stories of all the sex magic that went on in
Right.
the days of, all in Genesis, in Deuteronomy and Numbers, a lot of that stuff is talked about a whole lot. That there was a lot of the sex ritual magic that was taking place. And that is still the reality of what we're seeing because we look at it from the standpoint of trading on the sacrificial blood of Yeshua.
Mm.
And we say that now, there's been a trade that's taken place, but really it was him just showing us who we were to begin with.
Mhm.
But the whole idea of communion is actually older than anything that's part of the Christian writings. That was this whole communion and offering bread goes all the way back to Quetzalcoatl and Aztec beliefs because they would actually take the seeds and honey and bread type dough, and they would mix it all together, and they would make this statue of Quetzalcoatl, and then they would all break it off and eat off of it and call it that they were partaking of their God. So, I
Mm.
mean, this has always been something where along the way, people have been believing that there's a transference and knowing that there's some type of transference. And so, those who decide to go on the very dark side of it have learned how to take transference at a generational level, at a like I said, interstellar level, from a very dark source. They understand sex and copulation beyond what most people do.
Mhm.
They understand when that light comes in, you can put souls into it, you can bring entities into it. We're getting a little crazy now, aren't we,
Keep
brother?
going. He's good. I love it. Keep it coming.
But they understand. I mean, and they kind of slightly put it out into the well, not slightly, they subtly put it right in our faces, right, hidden in plain sight.
Mhm.
And so they show us in movies, they show us in TV, they tell us in songs, the people in interviews talk about it. It's talking about how they're clones, people talking, coming forth saying they made us eat babies, they trapped us in, this type of blackmail because of what they had me do, some kind of sexual ritual
Right.
act that was so depraved,
Mhm.
all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that's where you have people that show up out of nowhere overnight. And you have instant celebrity status for
Right.
people that just show up out of nowhere.
Mhm.
And this is because of those that have been practicing and trading on that for so long. And it goes back to when Yeshua showed up and he stepped off the island of Mark 5, and the power of who he was reverberated through that whole island.
Mhm.
And they all come running to him and said, oh my gosh, we know who you are. I really missed an opportunity there. They should have said, oh my God,
Yeah.
we know. Anyway, and when he stepped on that island, they all come running right down. And so I'm going to steal Justin word here, man. I'm getting pretty whacked all of a sudden. Not gonna lie, I've been getting whacked for a long time, and sometimes it interfaces with some of this weird stuff too.
Yeah.
Because ooh, because in the midst of it, the goodness of the Father is always running right through it as a beautiful stream,
Correct.
purifying, cleansing, revealing, and
Yeah.
overtaking. Ooh. But when he steps on that island, they come running to him, and Legion shows up. What do they say? Have you come to torment us before our time?
Mm.
So what does that mean? There's a lot there, but the main thing we'll focus on of what you said is they understand there's a time.
Hmm.
They understand there's a time where there's going to be some climactic stuff that takes place where there's not going to be the ability for them to operate in their wickedness anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so when they say, have you come to torment us before our time? He has grace and mercy upon them. And he says, you can go into the pigs. And of course, they immediately run and they jump off the cliff and all that good kind of stuff. Well,
Hmm.
oh man, I didn't expect to go down this road at all. But that gets, that gets really, really interesting because when you start going back and once again look at the Genesis reality, when the Elohim actually created, you'll see that all this stuff was brought out of the waters when
Hmm.
the Elohim created. Now, does that have anything to do with how a lot of people are now saying that they're seeing a lot of interstellar spacecraft that are in the waters, coming in and out of waters and moving around the waters? I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe. I won't even bring that up.
You just
But
did.
I know that's why I like to do it like that. But if you go back and look, there's never been, even with the flood that took place in the days of Noah and all those things, there was never any judgment upon anything from the water,
Mm.
which I just found extremely interesting because of where it talks about how the waters were where the fish came from, the waters where the birds came from, the waters where the dry land came from. It all came out of the water. So there's this really interesting thing when the pigs run and jump, they go into the water, down on the
Interesting.
cliffs, and go back kind of where they came from, if you will.
Right.
But anyway, so there's a time that they're referencing and they say, have you come torment us before our time? So there's a time that they are referencing. And I don't think that's all necessarily at one specific time, but I think as time has gone forward, including where we're at now and where we're moving into, there's been a consistent judgment, if you will, that takes place upon some of these strongholds and ancient wickedness, ancient gods, entities that have been chained up, and that's all parabolical. Because if they were sentenced to become men that die, and it says they were chained, they were actually given a DNA that was now mortal. Is what happened, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
Hmm.
Is they went from this immortal god status to immortal status.
Right. Right.
And so the chains that I think that they were given was the chains of death will eventually drag them all the way down.
Mm.
And so how they continue to try to avoid that or get past that, move that, is some of that same stuff we talked about. And now I don't know what channel you're going to have some of this on and if it's going to get too much for YouTube or whatever, but the life being in the blood has still been so important to those who are taking it from others so that their life will be extended
Right.
because these gods are the ones that find themselves, as they always have been historically, as the ones that are in a place of power, a place of money, a place of control. You know, people know the names. You know, it sounds like Build a Bear, but instead it's Burger. You have others that are, the ones that make the crock pots, the Crockefellers, all
Yeah.
these different names that are out
Correct.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, in places that are in royalty,
Hmm.
and a lot of people are going to know the stories just from being in the realm that you're in a lot, and that I'm in not quite as much publicly, but that I am on my own a lot as well. Where you see people having these hunting parties, where you see people that have these meals, these things that the FBI files
Hmm.
brought out into the public not too long back. A lot of the stuff that's going on. Why is that? Because that is where, going back to where we started, these gods
Yep.
found themselves now trapped in humanity and they're in a seed line war. And so, how do they overcome death? Well, they're not going to overcome death the way we overcome death, which is through Yeshua and
Hmm.
understanding that we are immortal beings and that we don't have that same judgment upon us. But yet, when we partake in the same mindset that puts us there, we make ourselves available to death. So, that's the
Hmm.
whole thing with immortality in ourselves and condensing it
Yeah.
very, very small.
Yeah.
But they're stealing it, and when you also begin to understand being able to ascend and going into the multiverses and going into parallel time frames and all that, you can find that a lot of these beings are traveling through the open portal of the cross of Yeshua back to another on the opposite side of judgment and bringing it back into the realm of where things have already been judged.
Right.
And so then they try to then say, well, it's like taking old seeds from an old harvest and trying to plant it into new land. And it may try to bear some fruit for a little while, but eventually it's going to be drowned out. What is this righteous judgment, you ask? It's that love is going to win. So it's all about a vibrational frequency. If you take a shark out of water and put it on asphalt, I'm a much better match for that shark than I was if I'm in the water with it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm not going to fight that thing in the ocean ever. I mean, you might give me some things, I might feel a little more comfortable, but I'm still going to be pretty shaky about it. But you put a shark on asphalt, I'm going to feel a lot more confident. And so when these vibrational frequencies of the heart of the Father is understood by creation and understood by us, the offspring of the Most High, the sons of God, but instead of the Benai Elohim, we're the Huios Theos, which is mentioned in Romans 8. So we're a whole new creation. That's why 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about how in Christ there is all things old have passed away. There's a new creation. There's a new man. Well, the reason why it talks about that is because now we're this demigod kind of creation as well, but we're the demigod kind of same creation of Yeshua, which is not the susceptibilities to anything corrupt that you would think of with humanity. It's a purified, full God version of a God man.
Mm.
We just don't get ourselves there mentally. That's what we're going to. But as the tide is rising, right? It says all high tide raises all ships. Well, when you're part of that corruption, which is not humanity, it's going to be the Elohim, the Benai Elohim, the hybrids, the Nephilim. We didn't even say that word yet. Can you believe it? We made it this far. We didn't
Nephilim,
say that
yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Surprised we made it this far at this conversation that didn't even say that word yet. But when you have all of those things that are on that side of it, the rising tide of the vibrations of love, mercy, tenderness, grace, who the Father is, that stuff is sinking further and further into that. So to me, that time, have you come to judge us before our time? Well, that time that they're talking about is when all the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the seas.
Mm.
That to me is the flooding, the drowning, the destruction, if you will, of all the corruption.
Mm.
I'm not sure where you stand or where a lot of people stand, but I'm not in a get out of trouble ticket rapture mentality guy whatsoever.
Mhm.
We're taking over this place. Jesus already said, Yeshua already said, this is part of it. This is the kingdom. We're reestablishing it as the kingdom. You can go all the way back into Genesis and even calls it heaven when the waters and the land are separated. So I mean, it's all part of it. It's the
Mhm.
territory. And so there is this reconstruction that has been taking place. And that actually, if you want, I don't believe in Jesus going to a place where he's got a hammer and nails and he's saying, I go to make a place for you. And we're like, oh, he's in a construction plan in heaven and he's got a blueprint. He's building us all mansions. No, he's talking about being one with all of us as well as us working with him to transform all of this creation into its intentional purpose.
Right. Yeah.
And so, in that intended purpose, it removes, obliterates, destroys those that are operating at a frequency such as the evil of the Elohim and Benai Elohim that did choose that.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
not all that did. Not all of them did. It's very clear that not all of them did. Just some of them did that. So for those that did, and yeah, I mean, I'll take a pause again there for a minute.
This is
I don't
this
know
is
how far off topic I got there for a
no,
few
this is
minutes.
great. This is gold, really is, and you're really nailing it here because this is why I think people don't ask questions. Particularly, so I'm in the UK, and nobody really thinks about why the royal family are so obsessed with bloodlines and so
Mm,
obsessed with if somebody is going to marry into the royal family, they have to go through checks. They have to check they're of a
yeah,
certain bloodline, so their offspring can be of a certain bloodline and things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree, but it's all connected to what you're saying, right?
yep,
That they know what bloodline they're of, and they know
yep,
about this stuff that we're talking about, and they've kept us ignorant of this stuff.
100%. That's the
Um,
whole Princess Diana reality.
Right. She
You know,
wasn't of the bloodline, I believe. I believe.
yeah, and she also came into this and basically said, okay, well, I agree, kind of like how Nimrod was able to make himself what he wasn't.
Mm,
So there's ways that Nimrod had the capacity to turn himself into one of the ones that was like that naturally.
mm,
So then these people have rituals and have their sorcery and magic, and Aleister Crowley was able to introduce that to a ton of people,
right.
especially he talked about having his little sidekick, and the name's eluding me at
Is
the
it
moment.
Lam?
Yes, that's it. That's
Lam.
it. That's it.
Yep. Yep.
And of course, he's talking about a small gray.
Yep.
And, that's his picture that he drew, is a picture of a small gray being.
Correct.
So, but anyway, and now just a side fun note here, little sidebar. What do they call the top elite celebrities? A-listers.
Hmm.
A-lister Crowley. A-listers. Anyway,
Ah, I never
I've
thought
always,
of
I've always, I've always found that very interesting. It
that.
may
Yeah,
not be, but it's just one of those things that, when you're trying to see into the 3D picture,
yeah.
see
Hmm.
the picture behind all the little designs.
Yeah,
I see
yeah.
stuff like that, and I'm like,
Hmm.
A-lister, A-lister.
You're right.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Anyway,
That is
and
interesting.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Diana, not only was she an outsider that was brought in, agreed to a lot of things, she then wanted out,
Mm,
and you don't get out. Like you were saying, how important all these bloodlines and everything matter.
mm.
If they have any way about it, you're not getting out.
Right.
And so we know what happened with her. And that's because, like you said, they're protecting something that
Mm,
goes way beyond just their royalty, their own self prescribed royalty. They're protecting things where they, I don't like using his name a lot because of how so many people have twisted so much around it, but and the persona that comes, but it's kind of the same idea as what Hitler believed about Aryan races, and
yeah.
why he was on some type of mission to accomplish something with the genocides being a purging and a cleansing. I, I'm not on Hitler's side, guys. I'm not on Hitler's
No.
side. I'm just saying that that is why he thought he had a mission, was because he thought that he was to bring a preservation, and a judgment against those that were not of the Aryan brotherhood or
Mm,
race, and
mm.
which you got to think about how he, for all the horrible stuff he did, he must have been the greatest motivational speaker, because he said, that blonde hair and blue eyes meant you were royalty, and he had brown eyes and dark hair. So,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that dude somehow, anyway, uh, comedy's my side act. Anyway,
Mm,
but yeah, no, you're 100% right. And that's why, you see even the preservation going so far as the documented incest and the documented offspring that was carried on,
mm,
so corrupted and bad that you had a king that basically had the IQ of 35 and only had missing fingers and
mm,
toes, and
mm,
just couldn't even hardly function. But
mm,
that was just all part of preserving that bloodline, as you
mm,
said,
mm,
and making sure that it carried on, because it they all felt like, and they were probably mostly all true, that they were the descendants of, if not the full embodiment of, not only on a DNA level, but on a soulish level, of these entities. Going back to that Ezekiel 28 story again, and you see there's actually way more than just a story of Goliath, but it's very clear when it says that he was six fingered, six toed. When you actually go do some of your own digging and research on that, that was a symbol of royalty that was known back then as well too.
right.
And when it talks about David's mighty warriors, which by the way, David redeemed a lot of those hybrid beings.
Hmm.
That's why it
Yep.
talks about that. When it
David's
talks
mighty
about
men.
David's
Yeah.
mighty
Yeah.
exact,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's because he redeemed a lot of them and brought them into the righteous fold, if you will,
Oh no, we have a phrase.
thing of that particular race of giants. And so they recognized that he was part of it, which was actually known as the Raphaim. So not the Nephilim this time, but of the Raphaim. And that was what type of race of giant that Goliath was through the Philistines. And so things like that mattered. he was one of the I feel like his generation didn't continue after him, which was part of the whole story of David killing him, taking off his head, and then his head being buried there, and it's where later Christ was crucified.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Right.
Golgotha is called the place of the
The
skull,
skull. Is that
and it
why?
was
I
because
didn't know that.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, the giant skull that was buried there was Goliath's skull, and that's exactly the same place where
Oh,
they put the cross. So then Yeshua's blood actually ran right down into the ground
right.
over top of the head of Goliath's skull. Maybe not literally, but it was in the exact same area geographically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just a side note on something about I heard about the way David restored the mighty men. So for people that don't know, there's a story in the Bible that Luke's referring to about there were these kind of like hybrid people, you might want to call them, and they were kind of like appalled at their state. They didn't like being what they were. This is what I've heard.
Yeah,
And what David did was he took them on, and he was all about he was a musician. He played his music or whatever. They actually used frequency to restore their DNA. He actually created frequencies that actually
yeah,
redeemed their blood and redeemed their very energy, and they actually became his strongest warriors on the side of the light. And I'm just thinking, wow, what a picture of restoration that is.
yeah. Oh man, 100%. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. That's such a great side note, and that's the whole reason also. Whenever it talked about Saul
Mm,
getting so bent out of shape, and he would call in David, and David would play, and the frequency
right.
would release healing to calm Saul. You're exactly right. That's
Mm,
that's that's what I have always seen that he did for those mighty men as well too.
mm.
Um, and then you have well, anyway, yeah, a whole different rabbit trail. But yeah, so the same idea with what has been running through the lines, and then redemption being able to come to pass, as well as the righteous judgment coming to pass, is now where we're at here in the present,
Hmm.
as well as moving continuously into the future. And so a lot of stuff shifted. Obviously, most people are going to say, yeah, of course. But 2020, of course, was such a massive shifting year for a lot of things. There was so much that was brought forth, that was revealed, corruption that existed, um, things that were being done that were just obviously so wrong and corrupt. And anyway, lots of stuff got brought forth in that time frame. So we're moving into even more of that same thing, where I think we're going to see a revealing of a lot more of that. And I do think you mentioned disclosure a few different times. I think that's a very good way of putting it, because I think this next level of what's really going to be revealed is a lot of the ancient wickedness that has been associated with the interstellar, interdimensional beings. And so there's a lot of excitement that's really kind of populated here in the past several years, and I'm on that bandwagon too. And I love him, but about Bigfoot, like you talked about, you've had somebody on here that's talking about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, the interdimensional capacity of Bigfoot. Obviously, of course, about small grays we mentioned a minute ago with Lamb, and then tall grays, and then all sorts of different ones that are out there. The Palladians. There's just a lot of stuff that is coming to pass that I think is to reveal a lot of what's been, uh, to use some kind of real good Christian terms, the veil, the other side
Hmm.
of the veil, what's really been there all along. And so much of it actually does have to do with the connection to the Elohim, the Benai Elohim, the Nephilim, the demons, all of this connection. And a lot of it has to do with interdimensional, interstellar, futuristic, if you will, beings. And that gets into, where do we exist in time? Well, I believe we are eternal beings that are able to exist in all realms of time
Hmm.
at the same time.
Right.
Language is sometimes hard to really incorporate into, how advanced some of this can get. But we are operating in the past, present, and future all at the exact same time, in my opinion. And so when we're able to understand that, we begin to realize that a lot of this stuff we are transforming, quote unquote, in the future, but is actually because we're moving futuristically towards the past.
Hmm.
And so there's this point in time, and Galatians 4 talks about how when the fullness of time had come. So that's when it says, then Christ was born under the law, and then became made as like us, and then he was crucified, all that. It says that that was at the beginning, or at the fulfillment of time.
Yeah.
And so where he is the ending in the beginning, so there's a timeline there that I think became completely obsolete. And so the new timeline became moving forward if you looked at it on a timeline, but really what we're doing is we're moving forward by completely redeeming the past.
Hmm. Interesting.
So forward is back,
Right.
right? And so in the if the forward is back, then we know from what we just talked about that there was a whole lot of mutual relationship amongst all the living beings and humanity.
Mm.
All the races, if you will, of all the divinity understood each other, interacted with each other, worked with each other, and knew their places, if you will. Remember, left their rightful place,
Mm.
right? So there was this harmony, this union, this interaction. And so when we begin to realize that there's a whole side of wickedness that has been doing this to get to things they don't need to be through wicked means, well, then there's a righteous reality of that.
Hmm.
And so ascension, moving through worship, moving into the place of ecstatic joy, moving into those places like you said Justin Abraham is really pushing forward, places that Nancy Cohen
Mm.
has been at for a while, pushing these things forward. It's that reality that's the righteous real of it. That means you can interact with these beings we're always meant to interact with. We're not supposed to be on some other side of a veil with all these different entities and beings. Now, I'm also a firm believer that it's got to be corporately for the most part. Now there's people that can do a lot of these things on individual levels, but that the whole reason why so much hasn't happened so fast, and in our eyes we think 10 years is such a long time on
Hmm.
and on the clock of the Father is like a blink, or a drop, or even less, right? It says a year is like 1,000. So I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
or a day, sorry,
A day's like a
a day is
thousand years.
a
Yeah, yeah.
thousand, yeah. And so when we start looking at things like that, we got to realize that we're the ones that get in a hurry.
Mm.
But a lot of this is because there's a corporate clock. It's about all of us moving. A lot of this judgment that's coming upon the ancient wickedness, a lot of the people moving into the awareness of who they are and their identity, as well as the disclosure of what all's really out there,
Hmm.
is coming more so on the clock of the Father, as opposed to us trying to force some things to happen.
Right, right.
You know what I mean? And then the reason I say all that, because it feels a little bit like off topic or moving a whole different way, is because I think a lot of what we're going to see in the prevention of that is a lot of false disclosure,
Right.
which
This is
is like
something I was
false
hoping.
flag reality.
Yeah, yeah. This interesting. You've just brought this up, um, because this is kind of like where, like the point I really, that we needed to get to this point. So everything
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
tried, everything you've said is created a brilliant segue into this, because I'm starting to be of the opinion that, again, a lot, we said at the beginning, a lot of people are saying something big's going to happen next year. I don't know what that's going to be,
yeah,
but a lot of, we're at an epoch of time here where these ancient gods, whether that be Norse, Egyptian, you'll see a thread through every kind of ancient civilization
yeah,
had these
yeah.
gods, and a lot of them have different names for the same beings.
Right,
A lot of them are the same beings, and I don't think our generation is any different. And
correct.
I think, okay, I'm going out on a limb here. I could be totally
Yeah,
wrong. Okay,
yeah,
that some of these ancient gods are going to try and be disclosure in some capacity.
yeah,
And I think we need to have our wits about us right now. We need to get into our hearts, into what, again, what Justin calls cardionosis. And
yeah,
that's been the
yeah.
journey for many of us, is getting back into our hearts. And I'm not speaking this like, I hope this doesn't happen. I hope I'm completely wrong. But
Right,
I think there is the war for disclosure. And I think, the negative side, if you will, we know that there's an Illuminati. We know that these self-proclaimed elite, which by the way are nothing but parasites because they live off
Right.
the life force of us, right?
There it
As
is.
we've just
Yep.
discussed, why they have no life force of their own. They need us. Um,
Yep.
and I just think we, just as an open statement, just to have our wits about us as we move forward, because these ancient gods know their time is up. Like we're at a time now when all the stuff throughout sort of history that they've been doing, it's like no more. So,
Yep.
the cross 2000-ish years ago dealt with it, and we've been in a time of restoration for the last 2000 years, and it's like we're at the
Yep.
end of the end for a brand new beginning in time.
Yep.
Um,
Moving into the seventh day on that calendar,
yes, yes, please.
that
If you've got any
thousand year
further thoughts
measurement.
on that, please,
Yeah, I do. I think you're 100% right, and that goes back to before we were on camera. I kind of told you a little bit about that experience I had where I felt, that there was a revelation that came about the story where the stork type angels are carrying the woman in the basket, and they set her down and they put a lead disc over the top of it, and they say this is ancient wickedness that's being buried away. And the whole reason that I was felt drawn to read that by the Spirit was because they then spoke to me and said, "Well, this is a time frame that you're encountering.
mm,
You're encountering a time frame now where lots of ancient wickedness is going to be released into the earth and revealed, so that there can be righteous judgment upon these ancient wickedness and entities that has been in existence for so long." And that's the other thing about it too, is that they have lost their capacity and power to really create for themselves, to bring things about for themselves. So that goes back to what you said. Not only do they steal and feed off of our very lifeblood, our trauma, our emotions, all those kinds of things, they also rely upon us to fall into a deceptive state so that we can use the power we have to actually further their agenda.
exactly right. Yeah.
And so in that, it's oh man, it sometimes it's just so much. You stop and think about it, it's just so much.
Yeah.
But in that vein, there's a lot of technology that has been brought about. There's a lot of technology that has been um, what's the word, reverse engineered and created from some things. We have documents now that have come forth that in the 50s and 60s we were trading with extraterrestrial
Mhm.
beings for technology to be able to use for things. Why does all that matter? Well, because it goes hand in hand with what you're saying. I think there's going to be a way where they cannot be disclosed or revealed, but they're going to try to do things to prevent it, or to do things where they present themselves outside of who they truly are.
Mm, mm,
And so, in that, that's why I say false flag, is that I believe there's going to be probably alien invasion type false flags that take place, appearances in the skies, appearances in different nations, different things that are going to happen to try to present themselves different from who they are, so that you'll ultimately, as you always see historically, have people that fall prey to that, become submissive to them, become worshipers of them, become followers of them. And a lot of all this that we've been seeing, and I'm not one of those people that's like everything's evil, there's a demon in every rock or any of that
mhm,
by any means,
mhm,
nowhere near that. But the training we've had with even saying that we're going to create things so that people will follow us. We have followers, we have people that are going to be the ones who, want all social media has created a ton of these, do you follow these people? I have 3 million followers, all this stuff, right?
mhm,
And in a lot of ways, it's used very good. And I'm not against technological advancements. I think we are well below a lot of the technological advancements that used to exist previously and that we'll have again.
mhm,
But so that's not my point. But my point is some of this is going to be used and already has been to train people to go into a hive mind type reality.
mm,
And so, in that hive mind type reality, which by the way was what was used for the Tower of Babel, to have everybody in the same language, everybody in the same thought process, it had everybody focused on the same thing, thinking the same thing, functioning the same way. And so, that's why there had to be a destruction that came of that. But that's what they want again. They want to have everybody in a hypnotic trance. They want to have everybody in a hypnotized state, basically figuring out how do they pull off a kind of a mass MK Ultra
mm.
How do they pull off a mass MK Ultra without sitting right directly in front of every single person and, either doing a wording or holding a clock in front of their face or all the different ways you can do some of this stuff. So how do they make a mass MK Ultra happen, right? Well, propaganda,
Hmm.
training people to move a certain way when certain things happen. So TVs, movies, conversations, books that get put out, and you think you're reading some author that knows all this stuff, and it's actually been AI generated, or it's actually been, something that this person was given the task to create because they want it interjected into the matrix and interjected into people's thoughts and into their DNA. Because as a man thinketh, so he is, right? So
Hmm.
your DNA takes on the very measurement of what you begin to study and learn and think about and process. So now you have all these people that start to think, well, this is the way aliens look, or this is the way this is going to happen, or this is the way they arrive, or this is how things are going to go.
Right.
They're here to help, they're here to destroy, and nobody really knows, right? And then they've got Ancient Aliens that comes out. There's a lot of good stuff in Ancient Aliens, but then there's also some things that are a little bit screwy because they're also kind of trying to get people to understand that they're going to come back a certain way or operate a certain way or whatever, right? And so there's all this stuff where, like you said, you've got to have that anchor. You got to have that anchor, that peace, that being led by the Spirit, that knowing Christ in you, the kingdoms within you, focus
Hmm.
on all that, have that coherence, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that they do in the 3D realm that's going to try to throw people into whatever the propaganda is that they want, whatever it is that they are desiring to have people do. And to keep people astray is always their number one tactic, because then they can continue to feed off them, like you said, harvest off of them. So I don't really know either exactly what's going to happen. I'm like you. I know that we're in a very apocalyptical time frame, not like as in end of the world, because that's not what that means anyway, but in a time of major unveiling, time of major revealing.
Hmm.
And it's going to be to where there is this righteous judgment that comes about. And so what all is that going to look like? I don't know, man. I'll be completely honest, but I think
Hmm.
a lot of it is definitely going to have to do with what's going to be appearing as what looks like extraterrestrial type things.
Hmm.
Because we need to understand that these people are our ancestors. We need to understand that these people are a part of who we are,
Hmm.
and there's a reality to all of it. But there's also a very deceptive side that people have taken on from
Hmm.
it. And in that deception, it's kept people hidden under the spells of other planets, keep people under the spells of these other entities, keep people in a trance of thinking that this is the way things are when it's not at all. And so then they glean from that person's, being deceived and confused and even terrorized by certain things. As you know, I'm trying to not talk too direct,
Hmm.
but yeah, it feels like we're definitely going into a time frame where it's almost like a 2020 type time frame again, where there's going to be like a baptism of a dark cloud, if you will, that took place in 2020, where we're moving through something to the other side of something.
Hmm.
What all's going to be in the midst of that, I'm not 100% sure, but I think we're going to see a lot of the sources of where a lot of these things have been hiding, in who they've been hiding. And I don't mean just like necessarily a specific individual, even though that's going to be real too, but in certain groups or certain forms, the way they've been operating, a lot of that's already becoming completely unveiled as
Hmm.
time has been going on. And we talked about some of that earlier with, the ritualistic abuse, and a lot of it's going to have to do with the trafficking that we have seen, missing children, all this different kind of stuff, because people are going to begin to find out that this has not just been about this planet or just about the humans on this planet, that all of this has still been fully connected to interstellar and interdimensional trafficking that has always been going on. Even though it's had a judgment that's come upon it, there's still those that have been operating in it because they've had those that have human mindsets, those that have human blood, the DNA of Adam, the DNA of Christ flowing through their veins, that are operating in it, keeping it alive.
Hmm. Hmm.
I feel like I'm saying a lot of nothing, but hopefully it's landing, because
Yeah.
It's without being too without being too forthright and
Graphic.
saying a lot of word, yeah, and graphic and different things. There's a lot, there's a lot of healing that's going to come to a lot of things, and a lot of
Yeah.
forced heads out of the sand.
Yeah.
A
I
lot of
agree.
people that have willingly hid are not going to be able to hide
Yeah.
anymore because of the things that are going to take place, the revelation that's going to come to pass, the disclosure that's going to come to pass. Um, yeah, I mean, there's just so much where people aren't even going to be able to hide from it anymore. Cognitive dissonance is not even going to be possible with some of the things that are going to be unveiled in the
Right.
coming days, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I want to finish on this because I want to end
Yeah.
this on. Would you believe it? We've been going for like well over an hour.
Oh wow,
I know, I know.
that's fast.
I could talk about this topic for hours, and maybe we'll have to do it again, and as things progress. But I talk a lot, about what we call Christ consciousness and
Uh,
embodying everything that Jesus is, and I'm big on that, but. you know, I know I think you're in agreement with this concept of theosis. Um, we need to understand who we are and what we are. We've been programmed to be subservient. We've been programmed for far too long
yep,
to accept our own slavery, essentially.
yep.
Um, Small side note, there's a guy called Guy Anderson who made a really interesting point recently about he believes that you know how it says in the Revelation. Now you'll probably say this way better than I do. In the book of Revelation, it says it's all wrapped up, the job's all done, but there is a time when the devil is unleashed upon the earth,
Mm-hmm, hmm
just before he's basically done away with, kind of forever.
hmm
Um, is it? I can't remember the time frame or anything like that. But this guy Anderson says that there was a lot of high technology in the earth, and a lot of people talk about Tartaria,
Yep.
which is this civilization, whether it's still here, I
Atlantis.
don't know. I'm not an expert on Tartaria, but there was this civilization on Earth of humans who were highly advanced, a real high culture. We lived amazingly. That was like he says. Now I'm not saying I'm in agreement with this. I'm just putting it out there for thought.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The 1,000 year reign of Christ was has been and gone. And then after that comes the time when the devil is basically unleashed for one final dib, and then he's done away with forever. He says that was around the 1700s, which is when the
Hmm.
Bavarian Illuminati established. And ever
Yeah,
since then, we've been going through this time where the devil was just came out in great wrath. That's what it says. He came in great wrath. Just putting it out there for thought that perhaps
yeah,
we're in the time where we're going to finally wrap things up, and that evil and that all the stuff we've been mentioning is going to be done away with. Um, but I think one of the things that we need to come to terms with the fact that I love this concept. I'm big on this at the moment that God became a man so that man could
yeah,
become God. Now,
yeah,
obviously, there is
yeah,
a maturation process in that, absolutely, but we're all growing in our Christhood.
yeah,
And some of us are on that path, some maybe not, but I hope that they get on that path, that realizing that as Jesus is, so are we in this world. Not as
yeah.
Jesus was when he walked this earth, as he is as a resurrected light
Come
being,
on,
you know?
100%. Yeah,
And we need to learn. And I think when we grasp this, we won't look at kind of like these other so-called little g gods as anything better than us. We're going to realize you're no better than us. You're no bigger than us.
yeah,
We're,
yeah.
we're created in the image of the Creator. We've been
That's right.
reformed and redeemed 2,000 years ago, right? Which was
Yeah.
the cross, which was the gospel, right? Um, and I would just think we should end on this. Have you got any thoughts on that, on this understanding?
Yeah, yeah. How quick or how long you want the ending to be? I'm just kidding.
We could go
But
for hours, I know.
no, I'm not gonna take too much more time on it. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, man. Because I'm a very firm believer in that we were in our godhood before we were ever in our humanity,
Mm,
and had an amnesia to the fact that we were part of the Godhead.
right.
And that's why in some Kabbalah teaching and ancient Jewish teachings, they actually talk about how surprisingly, there's some ancient Jewish teaching that's very Christian, but anyway, that talk about how there was always the four parts of God.
Mm.
and that the Trinity got mistaken for how it was always four parts. And that actually makes a ton of sense to me when I read and studied that, because I also always felt like that was the reality of Ezekiel talking about the lion, ox, eagle, and man.
Okay.
Was that it was always this four part, the four faces of the Most High, if you will. And so one of the faces the Most High has always had as man. But anyway, was that whenever man fell into a type of deception through the schemings of the Elohim and Benai Elohim, that this whole process has been a story of the Godhead restoring the fourth part of itself, which is the mankind. And so I'm a very firm believer in the fact that he knew us before we were ever in our mother's womb, that he
Hmm.
knew us for all of eternity, that as long as he's existed, we've always existed too.
Right.
And so the recognition is not just about the understanding of the reclaiming of who we are and our identity as associated with humanity, but also the understanding of who we are as that immortal, eternal, everlasting being
Mm.
that's always existed, always will exist, has no beginning, has no end, because we've always been one with Christ. And that he says, when you see me, you've seen the Father. And then he says, so am I, so as I am, so are you in this world. So that means you can say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father,
Hmm.
right? And the same thing with how the living creatures, it said, every little which way the Father turns, they cry out, holy, holy, holy. Why is that? Because when they peer into all of the living creation, they see the fragmented glory, not fragmented and weaker, but fragmented into being put into a different version of itself, of the
Mm.
glory of the Father in all of us.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I agree with you completely. We were never meant to be slaves. We were never meant to be subjected to any law. One time, many, many years ago, the Father spoke to me and said, when you read about Paul talking to them at that time frame about being free from the law of Moses, you need to also look at it as being free from the laws of all of the earth that has been thrust upon you.
Mm.
So, it's like, oh, well, that's where part of the introduction to, well, death doesn't have any sting over me because I've already died,
Mm.
right? But yet I live. And so it's the same thing with everything else. We have no subjection to a wickedness. We have no subjection to an evil. We have no subjection to anything that would be part of the darkness, if you will, evil, any of that. So I fully agree with you that we are coming back into that corporate understanding, as well as obviously has to happen on an individual level of who we are as Christ within us. It doesn't mean that Jesus is living here inside of me. It means that Jesus and I are one because he was the firstborn of many brethren, and that spirit of Christ is the same spirit. It
Mm.
says, if any man is in Christ, they are now one spirit. So Paul's not saying, if you've now entered into Christ, he's saying, well, hey, if you understand that the spirit is Christ, and that's your spark of life, your flame, eternal flame of who you are, then you'll understand that you're the same spirit as who Christ is.
Mm.
And that time he references the person. But see, when it says Jesus said the kingdom is within you and Christ within you, once again, he's not talking about a person or talking about a dimension of, trying to go up above the clouds into the place of heaven. No, it means that all of the authority of heaven and where we actually enter into is through our being and going inward, as we know, ascension and all that,
Mm.
meditation, all those things. But that when it says the Christ in you, the hope of glory, it is referencing Christ, which is the anointing, which is the glory, which is our very genetic essence and origin, who we've been before we ever tasted humanity. I've told people for years, we got to remember that we're not humans having spiritual experiences. We're spirits having human experiences,
Right. Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so, yeah, when you begin to understand that, A, the stuff we all talk about tonight doesn't become fearful. B, all that stuff that we talked about, we understand, well, we want to help other people become free from it. And then C, you recognize that, well, this is all part of that redemptive story. This is all part of how we are operating in the past, present, and future in all realms of time at the same time, bringing an absolute restoration, redemption, and newness to that which is in existence.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I'm with you fully, man. It's about us breaking off that purposeful amnesia so that we could come into these generational timelines and bring a redemption to it. and then also about shifting that which is in the future and recognizing who we are the same way that Yeshua knew who he was.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're totally right. It's the pre-birth slash post-crucified slash post-resurrected version of Yeshua that we need to understand we are as well too.
Right. Exactly. We're multidimensional. We're everything
Yeah,
we've ever dreamed of, and I think that's a great place just to end this. I mean, Luke,
yeah.
you've been it's been a blast. Like that was absolutely brilliant. Everything I hoped it would be. And before we finish, have you got anything upcoming, or do you want to put? You've got your book. What's it called?
So my book is The Immortal You. I know it's super clever. Um,
Keep it
and
simple.
yeah, that's right. And you can find it on Amazon. So you can just look up my name if that's easier on Amazon. You'll find it there. Um, Anything upcoming, not really. I'm getting my website fully developed here very soon so that I
Mhm.
can have some opportunity to really dabble in some things again.
Yeah.
But like I kind of said earlier, I've been a little bit quiet, more kind of family man,
Hmm.
if you will, raising my family and doing those
Beautiful.
kinds of things the past
Mm.
couple of years more than really anything else at all. So yeah, I appreciate you having me, Craig, and it's an honor. And I hope that you are able to just absolutely reach anybody and everybody that needs to be reached, that your platform will grow and expand. You'll be able to get voices on here that will help transcend and transform so many people, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Luke.
Yeah,
And I'll
yeah, absolutely.
speak to you again soon sometime.
Yeah,
Speak
sounds
soon.
good. Thank you, Craig.
Thank
Much
you so
love,
much.
man. Yeah,
Speak to you soon. Bye
thank
bye.
you. All right, bye.